Across the open waters off the South Carolina coast, where the fog glides softly over the waves and the early sun melts gold into the sea, a patrol boat cut quietly through the morning hush. On board, a German shepherd named Rex stood at the bow still, alert and staring into the distance. There, far beyond the mist, floated a man, alone, barely conscious, clutching a piece of broken timber nearly 90 nautical miles from land. No one knew how long he had been drifting, but Rex had seen him, and in that moment, the ocean gave up a secret it had tried to keep. Before we begin, do you have a dog of your own? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to know who's watching alongside their furry best friend. And if you believe that no living being should face the storm alone, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The sea off South Carolina's southern coast wore a quiet face that morning, an endless sheet of gray-blue, still and brushed with fog, as though the Atlantic itself hadn't yet fully woken. The sky was a muted canvas, streaked with pale gold, while low clouds hovered just above the water like soft ghosts. It was the kind of morning that spoke only in whispers. A solitary patrol boat hummed low and steady across the calm swells. On board was Dana Brooks, a 27-year-old officer of the United States Coast Guard. Dana was tall, with a lean, athletic frame and a purposeful way of moving, like every motion had already been measured against 1,000 others in her head. Her face was angular, lightly freckled, her eyes a stormy gray. She wore her uniform crisp, her posture always straight, disciplined, sharp, and silent. People who didn't know Dana said she was distant. People who did said she carried too much ocean in her bones. And both were right. She had joined the Coast Guard at 19, not for adventure, but for confrontation. The sea had taken her father when she was just 11 years old, swallowed him and his ship during a freak squall without ever returning a trace. Since then, Dana had returned to the water again and again, not out of love, but out of defiance. Somewhere beneath her quiet was a girl still scanning the horizon, hoping the tide might give him back. Next to her, sprawled yet alert, was Rex, an 8-year-old German Shepherd K9 with the proud, powerful frame of a natural protector. His fur was thick and deep-colored sable and black, like burnished armor, and a faint scar traced down his left hind leg, a permanent mark from a near-fatal injury during a coastal drug raid 2 years ago. Though his gait had changed, his instincts hadn't dulled. Rex operated with the precision of a veteran and the loyalty of a brother. He was Dana's shadow, her compass, and often her only witness. They were aboard CG-451, a mid-range patrol boat assigned to the coastal sweep south of Charleston. The morning's assignment was unremarkable standard coastal surveillance through quiet fishing lanes, barrier inlets, and old shipping routes. Dana had done it dozens of times, routine, repetitive, safe. But routine didn't make her relax. It never had. She sipped her lukewarm coffee from a tin mug, one hand on the throttle, eyes darting across the water. Rex lay beside the helm in silence, his ears twitching to distant gull cries and the subtle groan of the vessel. The hum of the engine was comforting in its familiarity. For now, there was nothing to report. And then Rex moved. It was subtle, but to Dana, it was like a flare. His head lifted, his ears pivoted forward. He stood slowly. No sound, no growl, just a sharpened stillness in his body that screamed attention. Dana followed his gaze instinctively. Far ahead, through the soft curtain of mist, something broke the line of the horizon, barely visible, half submerged. A small dark form, drifting. Her pulse picked up. She leaned forward slightly and narrowed her eyes, but the distance made it hard to tell whether it was just debris, a stray buoy, or something else entirely. "What do you see, partner?" she muttered, though she already knew the answer. Rex didn't react this way for nothing. She stepped around the console, grabbed the binoculars, and trained them toward the distant shape. The fog played tricks. Sometimes it vanished, then reappeared. Whatever it wasn't a wave pattern. It wasn't moving fast either, just floating. Her brows furrowed. "Okay," she murmured, setting the binoculars down. She reached for the throttle and gently adjusted their heading. "Let's take a look." The vessel creaked slightly as it turned toward the object. Rex stayed perfectly still, eyes fixed, as if memorizing every ripple around it. The air felt heavier now, the silence deeper. Dana felt that familiar ache deep in her chest, the kind that surfaced every time the sea went quiet before revealing something it had kept hidden. The kind of silence that always came before a story began. And this morning, the ocean had something to say. The boat cut gently through the thinning fog as it approached the floating shape. The sea was still quiet, unnervingly so, and the sun, now rising higher, cast long streaks of gold over the water, warming its steel-gray surface. Dana leaned forward, her eyes locked on the silhouette, which was now clearly more than just driftwood. It was a man motionless but not submerged, clinging to a long, curved piece of wood that resembled part of a broken mast. His body bobbed gently with the swell, his head slumped forward, hair wet and streaked white with salt. Dana eased the throttle back and brought the vessel to a slow crawl. She kept her eyes on the figure, fingers tightening slightly on the controls. "Rex, stay," she said softly. The dog sat but didn't take his eyes off the man. Dana moved quickly now, donning her harness and clipping into the safety line before grabbing the long rescue hook. The vessel drifted closer. The scent of salt, sweat, and something faintly metallic reached her as she leaned over the edge. The man's face came into view, deeply lined, sun-scorched, and slack with exhaustion. His lips were cracked, cheeks hollowed, and a coarse white beard clung to his chin like unkempt moss. He looked to be in his 70s, though the sea had aged him further. With the grace of training and the urgency of instinct, Dana worked the hook under the man's arm and secured the rope sling beneath his shoulders. The rescue was awkward, his limbs were stiff, and his grip on the timber was death-like. But after a few tense minutes, she managed to haul his frail frame up over the side and onto the deck. As soon as he hit the metal floor, Rex was there, sniffing him with a mix of curiosity and alertness. Dana knelt beside the man and checked his pulse, slow, thready, but present. His eyelids fluttered faintly. She opened the thermal blanket from the emergency kit and wrapped it around him, careful not to jostle his limbs too much. His clothes were drenched and ragged, torn at the shoulder, and stained with sea salt. He wore an old fisherman's jacket with faded brass buttons, and on his left wrist, a worn leather strap watch that had stopped ticking long ago. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said, gently tapping his cheek. The man stirred and released a low, guttural sound, less a word than a breath. His eyes opened briefly, bloodshot and bleary, the pupils sluggish. Dana reached into his jacket, searching for identification. She felt a lump in the inner pocket and pulled it free. A waterproof pouch sealed tight. Inside was a photograph and a folded sheet of paper, its edges curled from time and moisture. She unfolded the photo first. A man and a woman stood on the deck of a small sailboat, arms wrapped around each other, the kind of smile that's full of secrets and summer wind etched across their faces. The woman had soft curls and wore a navy scarf knotted at her neck. The man had jet black hair and broad shoulders, unmistakably younger. On the back, written in faded pen, "Walt and Mary, Maiden Voyage, 1981. Dana glanced down at the unconscious man. "So, your name's Walt." She unfolded the other paper. It was a sketch of hand-drawn boat blueprint, surprisingly detailed. The hull was labeled Mary 2. The lines were steady, annotated in small, neat handwriting. It looked like the draft of a dream. Dana felt something tighten in her chest. This wasn't just some drifter. This man had a story, a life. Rex let out a soft whine, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Dana folded the items and tucked them back into the pouch, slipping it safely into the side pocket of her own jacket. She reached for the portable IV kit in the first aid locker, then paused. Her eyes drifted out over the water. How had he made it this far? 89 nautical miles off the nearest coast, with no life vest, no radio, nothing but a splintered piece of wood and a pocket full of memory. Dana activated the mic. "Sector Charleston, this is Patrol Unit 451. Man recovered elderly, unconscious, signs of dehydration and exposure, name possibly Walt. Found with personal effects indicating long-term drift. Requesting guidance. Preparing return course." The reply came with a short delay. "Copy that, 451. Stand by for medical dispatch and extraction coordinates. Stay with subject and monitor vitals." She placed the mic down and sat beside the man. His breathing was shallow, but rhythmic now. She reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from his forehead. "You're not going anywhere, Walt. Not today." Rex circled once, then lay down beside them both, resting his massive head just inches from Walt's shoulder. He exhaled heavily through his nose, a protective presence. The boat drifted in quiet, rocked by slow waves. Dana stared at the horizon, her mind flickering with images of her father's final voyage. How no body had ever been found, how she used to sit by the shore as a teenager and imagine he was still out there, waiting to come back. And now, here she was, pulling someone else's father from the same tide. The ocean didn't return the ones you lost, but sometimes it brought you someone who needed saving just the same. Walt Madsen lay curled beneath a silver thermal blanket, the corners fluttering slightly in the breeze as the patrol boat rocked gently in the slow, early swells. His face was motionless, locked in an exhausted grimace, but his chest lifted in small, irregular pulses, signs that life still clung to him, stubbornly. Dana knelt beside him, one gloved hand on his shoulder, the other holding a bottle of water pressed carefully to his cracked lips. "Just a sip," she murmured. "You're okay now. You're safe." He drank weakly, reflexive more than conscious. His body trembled with the effort. Then, after a pause, his eyelids fluttered open, bloodshot, glassy, struggling to focus. He seemed to register the morning light, then the sway of the boat, then her face. There was no fear in his eyes, only confusion, and something older, deeper, like a man caught between worlds. "Walt," Dana said gently. "Walt Madsen, right?" His lips parted, voice raspy. "That's me. Or what's left." Dana managed a small smile. "You're lucky. Another few hours, and that ocean might have kept you." She adjusted the blanket tighter around him, tucking it gently beneath his arms. "Do you know what day it is?" Walt blinked slowly, then shook his head by a fraction. "Don't matter," he muttered. "Time's funny, when you're waiting for nothing." At his side, Rex, the loyal German Shepherd K9, pressed his body against Walt's. The dog had not moved since Walt had been pulled aboard, remaining still, attentive, like a living shield. His thick coat now acted as insulation, and his amber eyes occasionally flicked up to Dana, then back to the frail figure he protected. Dana sat back slightly, resting on one knee. The morning sun was beginning to burn through the mist, casting soft lines across the deck. A gull cried overhead, wheeling alone in the open sky. "You fell?" she asked after a long silence. Walt's brow creased. "Yeah, middle of the night. Just went out to check the anchor line. Slipped on a wet patch. Rope snapped. Boat kept going. Didn't even hear me go." His voice cracked on the last word. Dana reached out and squeezed his hand lightly. "You were alone?" A pause. Then he gave the faintest nod. "Always been. For a while now." Dana noticed his gaze shift, almost reflexively, to the side pocket of her jacket. She knew what he was remembering, the photograph she had found earlier. Walt and Mary, 1981. Two smiling figures on a boat that looked far too small to hold that much joy. She pulled the waterproof pouch from her pocket and held it in front of him. "I kept these safe," she said softly. "Mary, she was your wife?" Walt's throat worked before words came. "A long time ago, she passed. Cancer." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Dana slipped the pouch back into her jacket and looked out at the sea. For a moment, the silence between them was shared and sacred. "She would have hated this," Walt said finally, eyes closed again. "Me, ending up half dead on some piece of driftwood? Embarrassing." Dana smiled faintly. "She'd probably be grateful you're still breathing." "No," Walt whispered. "She'd be mad I didn't finish the damn boat." Dana raised her brows. "Mary too?" He opened one eye. "Yeah, never did get it right. Spent 15 years drawing the plans. Could never bring myself to build it without her." Rex gave a soft grunt, as if reacting to the emotion in Walt's voice. The dog shifted closer, resting his chin on Walt's arm now, eyes half-lidded, his warmth, his weight. It was grounding. Dana stood and walked to the helm briefly, adjusting their drift to maintain position. Then she returned and sat cross-legged beside them. Her gaze fell on the old man, but her mind had slipped somewhere else. She remembered standing at the marina docks as a child, watching her father's boat disappear into fog. She had waited every morning for 2 weeks, hoping he'd return like some mythic sailor out of the storm, but he never did. She never got to say goodbye, never got to ask him why the sea mattered more than her birthday that year. That ache had hardened into resolve, the way salt turns soft ropes into stiff wire. But now, here was this man, Another sailor, another loss, and unlike her father, this one had come back. Walt stirred. "You got a name?" he rasped. "Dana," she replied. "Dana Brooks." "That your dog?" Dana looked at Rex. "Partner, technically, but yeah, he's mine." "Good dog," Walt mumbled. "He's warm." Dana chuckled. "He's better than most humans I know." Walt closed his eyes again. "Don't let him get old alone." The words struck Dana more than she expected. She said nothing in return, just reached over and rested her hand on Rex's back, letting the silence settle in again. The morning wind picked up slightly, a gentle stir that rippled across the ocean's skin. The boat rocked in slow rhythm, and the three of them, one woman, one dog, one man who should have died but didn't, sat adrift in the middle of nowhere, tethered only by breath, memory, and the unspoken recognition of shared grief. And somewhere deep inside Dana, something shifted. The late morning sun struggled to pierce the thickening marine haze over the southern waters of South Carolina. The air was still too still for comfort. Dana Brooks stood at the helm of her patrol boat, brow furrowed, hands steady on the throttle. The radio had given nothing but static since dawn, and their emergency locator wasn't picking up any nearby vessels. They were alone out here, just her aging K9 partner Rex, and an unconscious old man with the Atlantic's breath on his skin. She had made the call decisively. Head for Station Lock, a decommissioned rescue post tucked into a crescent-shaped inlet about 3 hours northwest. It hadn't been used in nearly a decade, but the foundation remained, and in a pinch, it could shelter them until comms returned or help arrived. It was a gamble, but a better one than sitting still. Walt lay wrapped in thermal blankets on the bench, his chest rising with shallow, steady breaths. Rex sat beside him like a sentinel, ears erect, nose occasionally twitching to check his scent. The old shepherd had seen more than most humans. Scars on his left shoulder and back paw bore witness to IEDs, barbed wire, and more than one failed mission. But this morning, his calm eyes held only patience. The ocean stretched endlessly, its light chop glittering under the sun. Dana kept one eye on the horizon and another on the depth gauge. The seafloor shifted in this region wreck country, her father used to say. One bad read, and you could hit a coral rise or a forgotten engine block. As the boat cut through open water, something dark caught her peripheral vision, just off starboard, riding low in the waves. Dana slowed the engine, narrowed her eyes, and altered course slightly. "Driftwood?" she murmured aloud. Rex stood up at the shift in tone. They approached slowly. The cluster of debris became clearer. At least 6 fragments, blackened and floating at odd angles. Some light like furniture panels, others heavy and half-submerged. Dana reached for the boat hook and hauled in a broad slab, charred edges, soot residue, and a curve that suggested it had once been part of a bow. Carved letters were barely visible beneath the burn marks. M, A, Rai, Zes, Ong. Her heart stopped. The boat. The one from Walt's blueprint. It had a name, Mary's Song. She looked over at the man, still unconscious. His dream had burned. Dana sat down slowly on the deck, the wood still damp beneath her. She remembered the old photo in his pocket. Walt and Mary, arms linked, a sketch in the corner. A promise made long ago. He'd tried to bring it to life, alone. Probably convinced it was his last great act. She closed her eyes, head tilted to the sky. "You tried to sail it, didn't you, old man?" Rex stepped forward and sat beside her. She laid a hand on his back, brushing the faded tags on his collar. "You know, I think we all carry ghosts, don't we?" She didn't say much more. The sound of the sea was enough to fill the silence between them. But in that moment, Dana felt something settle. It wasn't closure, not yet. But it was something close. She rose and gently nudged the throttle forward again. Station Lock was waiting, somewhere beyond that stretch of haze. With every mile they left behind, the wreckage shrank burnt wood, lost dreams. But what they carried with them grew heavier. The story wasn't over. Not for Walt, not for her, not for Rex. The first sign came with the change in the wind. The sea, which had carried them so gently only hours before, began to shift under their hull with a nervous energy. Dana stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the sky now thick with heavy gray clouds. The sun had vanished behind a smear of darkness creeping in from the northeast. an unnatural quiet pressing in before the storm's cry. She didn't need a forecast to know what was coming. Years on the water had taught her that nature never whispered twice. Dana tightened her grip on the wheel, her knuckles pale. Rex stood beside her, ears perked, gaze fixed ahead. The big German shepherd didn't bark. He never did when he sensed danger. He simply braced himself, as if preparing for a battle only he could see. Walt, the old man they had rescued, remained wrapped in thermal blankets on the bench inside the cabin, breathing shallow but steady. The rocking of the boat had begun to grow more violent, and the rhythmic slap of the water had become a disjointed, pounding roar. "Come on," Dana muttered to the sea. "Just give me another hour." But the storm was not in a bargaining mood. Suddenly, a sheet of rain slammed into the deck like a wall. The boat lurched hard starboard, sending the navigation console flickering. Dana's face twisted against the wind, her short dark hair plastered to her forehead. Rain stung her cheeks like needles. The sky had collapsed into a fury of thunder and slashing water. Waves rose around them, each one taller than the last, dark walls crowned with white froth. Dana worked the wheel, trying to hold a course toward the abandoned station lock. But the storm had its own plans. Lightning carved open the clouds in ragged streaks, and a boom of thunder rattled the hull. The sail and auxiliary one she'd pulled earlier to catch what little wind there had been had snapped loose at the top. Its rigging flailed violently, and with a sickening groan, one of the supporting arms cracked. Rex, still near Walt, had his body low, shielding the old man from the sharp lurches. Walt moaned softly in his sleep, a weak breath trying to rise through the cold and wet. Dana shouted something lost instantly to the wind and stumbled toward the sail to secure it. That's when the boom snapped. With a terrifying creak and a howl of wood torn from metal, the broken boom swung downward, crashing toward the deck straight for Dana. She didn't see it, not fully, not until a blur of black and tan slammed into her side, sending her sprawling across the wet boards. Her shoulder hit hard, but she was conscious, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Rex!" The boom had caught his hind leg in its descent. The German shepherd hit the deck hard, his body twisting unnaturally before he rolled onto his side, whimpering. Dana scrambled toward him, crawling across the slippery surface, heart hammering. "Rex! No, no, stay still, buddy," she choked, hands on his side. Blood mixed with rain beneath his paw. His leg was bent wrong, red and swollen. He let out a low groan, but didn't fight her touch. His eyes met hers, still sharp, still loyal, still there. Dana wrapped her arms around him, pulling him gently toward the cabin, dragging both their bodies through the rain. The sail boom clattered again as the wind twisted it on its base. She kicked the door open and hauled Rex inside, placing him next to Walt and covering them both with the last dry blanket she had. The storm raged on outside. Inside the dim cabin, the world shrank. It became just three breathing things huddled together in the dark. The howling wind made the walls tremble, and water still seeped through every crack. But in that small space, they made their own kind of shelter. Rex lay curled, his injured leg tucked beneath him, eyes half-lidded but watchful. Dana sat between the two of them, soaked to the bone, knees drawn to her chest. She wasn't shaking from the cold anymore. It was something else, something deeper. Walt stirred again. His voice came as a whisper. "Mary, did she find me?" Dana leaned over. "No, Walt, but we did. You're safe." The old man smiled faintly, unaware of the storm outside, of the bloodied dog lying beside him. He closed his eyes again, drifting. Dana looked at Rex. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice cracked. "You stupid, beautiful dog, you saved me again." Rex gave the softest wag of his tail, just once, before closing his eyes. Outside, the wind shrieked like a living thing, and the sea threw wave after wave at their hull. But inside, a strange peace settled between the three of them. A soldier, a stray, a protector, all clinging to one another in the wild, waiting for the storm to pass. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bruised sky streaked with salmon and indigo. The wind had settled into an exhausted sigh, and the sea, though still restless, had lost its rage. Dana stood at the helm, eyes red from lack of sleep, muscles sore, hands blistered from the wheel. But they were alive. Rex lay at her feet, his injured leg wrapped in gauze made from a torn sleeve and emergency bandage. He didn't move much, but his ears perked each time she spoke. Walt, bundled and drifting in and out of consciousness, lay on a stretcher fashioned from the bench cushions and secured beside the console. The boat creaked toward the inlet like a tired old soul returning home. Station Lock came into view, a gray husk of a building squatting on a low strip of beach, battered by time and tide. Its roof sagged, paint long gone, windows boarded or shattered. But it was land, and that meant hope. Dana guided the boat slowly toward the dock, remnants barely 6 wooden posts left standing. She throttled down, maneuvering with patience. The hull kissed the sandbank, and she dropped anchor. Then, carefully, she stepped out into the shallow surf and pulled them the final few feet to shore. She lifted Rex first. He gave a soft growl of pain, but didn't resist, his weight heavier than she remembered. She carried him up the beach, his head resting on her shoulder. Her boots sank into the wet sand with each step, but she didn't stop until they reached the shelter of the building's overhang. Next was Walt. He was lighter, bones and cloth, barely conscious. Dana returned for him, straining to lift his frame, but fueled by resolve. When she laid him beside Rex, she fell to her knees, winded, heart pounding with gratitude. She had barely settled when a distant noise broke through the morning quiet, the chop of helicopter blades. Dana shot up, eyes scanning the horizon. Sure enough, a Coast Guard chopper crested the tree line, red and white against the rising sun. She stumbled out onto the sand, arms waving, her voice hoarse but loud. "Here! Over here!" The bird circled once before lowering toward the clearing behind the station ruins. The wind from the rotors kicked up sand and debris, stinging her skin. Within minutes, 3 paramedics and a rescue officer in red gear were on the ground. One of them, a short, silver-haired woman with deep crow's feet and steady eyes, rushed toward Dana. Her name tag read, Nurse H. Caldwell. Dana pointed to the overhang. 2 survivors, 1 elderly male, unconscious, and 1 injured K9. The nurse ran ahead without question. Her movements were precise, practiced. She knelt beside Walt, checked his pulse, then gasped. Her hand hovered over his forearm. Dana moved closer. "What is it?" Caldwell turned, her voice low but trembling. "That tattoo. The anchor with the small flame. I know this man." Dana blinked. "You do?" The nurse nodded. "He saved my son, 19 years ago. There was a fire on a tugboat off Folly Island. My boy, he was only 17, part-time deckhand trapped under equipment. Walt Matson was the only one who went back, pulled him out while the others waited. I never forgot his name." Her eyes glistened as she pressed a hand to Walt's shoulder. "And I never got to thank him." Dana felt something twist in her chest. It was like watching a circle close. The team loaded Walt onto a stretcher with practiced care. 2 medics turned to Rex, scanning his wound. One of them, a tall man with dark skin and soft brown eyes, knelt and stroked the dog's neck. "Old guy's tough," he said. "Clean break, painful but fixable." Dana crouched beside them. "His name's Rex. He's not just a dog. He saved us both." The medic smiled. "Then we owe him too." The helicopter rose again, as Walt and Rex were secured inside. The nurse stayed behind for a moment, walking back to Dana with a folded blanket. "You brought him back," she said softly. Dana's voice cracked. "Barely. That's all we ever get," Caldwell replied. "Barely. But sometimes, barely is enough." As the helicopter lifted into the air, Dana stood alone on the beach. The wind tugged at her jacket. Her bones ached, but her heart felt a little lighter, a little warmer. The old boathouse smelled of cedar, salt, and thyme. Dust hung in the beams like memory. Through the warped windows, the marshlands of South Carolina shimmered in late afternoon gold. Inside, the rasp of sandpaper whispered softly, a rhythm older than words. Walter Madsen, now with a cane but a straighter back than before, stood before the skeleton of a boat. His silver hair was pulled back loosely, and though the weeks in the hospital had weathered him further, there was new fire in his pale blue eyes. He was no longer a man waiting to fade. He was, once again, a builder. The wooden frame before him rested on blocks, half-formed, its bow rising like a question. This was Mary's song, or what had survived of her. The storm had stolen her body, but not her spirit. Walt had requested to salvage what was left, and with Dana's help, they had brought back the battered remnants. Some pieces were splintered beyond use, but the heart of her, the center rib and stern remained intact. Enough to begin again. Dana visited often. She didn't say much, but she brought coffee and sometimes lunch, always sitting near the workbench with Rex curled at her feet. The old German shepherd was recovering, his legs still stiff, the fur shaved around his scar, but he walked again. He barked less now, more expressive with his eyes than his voice. Walt spoke to him like an old war buddy. "Guardian of the drift," he'd chuckled once, patting Rex's head. "You kept the old man floating." Rex had looked up at him with slow, blinking reverence. One morning, while Dana was helping Walt measure a new mast support, he disappeared into a side room and returned holding something behind his back. His cane tapped the floor in rhythm with his steps. Dana looked up from the vice grip. "Thought you might want this," Walt said, pulling the object into view. It was a wooden plaque rough, carved by hand but deeply etched with care. The words read, "Guardian of the Drift, Rex, 2025. Beneath it was a carved silhouette of a dog, standing proudly at the bow of a boat. Dana was quiet for a long moment. She took the plaque with both hands, brushing her thumb over the grooves. "You made this?" Walt nodded. "Took me a few days. Worth it." She blinked hard, trying to will the water back into her eyes. "Thank you." That evening, back at the Coast Guard quarters, she mounted the plaque on the wall of her office right, beside a black and white photo of her father, in uniform, standing by the harbor, his hand resting on a little girl's shoulder. From that night onward, she slept through till morning. Later that week, Walt resumed work on Mary's song with quiet determination. He refused power tools, preferring the hum of hand tools and the rasp of file and chisel. The act of building became a prayer, one he offered not just to Mary's memory, but to all the ghosts who had drifted with him through the sea that night. One day, a stranger came to the boathouse, a lean, freckled man in his 40s, with a tool belt and a soft Georgia accent. His name was Liam Hartley, a local carpenter and son of one of Walt's old Navy crewmates. He had heard about Walt's survival and showed up with a simple offer. "You saved my daddy once. Now I'm going to help you finish your boat." Walt tried to protest, but Liam smiled. "You can't say no. Southern tradition." And just like that, the team grew by one more. Dana brought them coffee. Liam brought fresh nails and a radio that played old blues songs. Rex supervised from the shade. By early autumn, the skeleton had filled out. A new keel sat firm, ribs curved with purpose. Walt moved slower, but his hands never faltered. One evening, Dana found him sitting alone, watching the tide roll in. She sat beside him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then Walt said, "You ever wonder why we're saved?" She tilted her head. "All the time. I think," he continued, "sometimes the sea gives back what it takes, just in pieces, broken ones, so we learn how to mend." Dana smiled faintly. "You've gotten wise, old man." He chuckled. "I was always wise. Just took a storm to hear myself think." Rex stirred, then laid his head on Dana's boot. The waters of Charleston Harbor shimmered beneath the late morning sun, their surface broken only by the slow sway of the newly restored Boat Mary's song. A soft breeze fluttered the flags lining the docks, and rows of uniformed Coast Guard officers stood in crisp formation beside townsfolk, their faces turned toward the harbor, where something rare was about to be honored. Not just survival, but the kind of resilience that stitched the wounded edges of the human spirit. Dana Brooks stood at the center of it all. She wore her navy blue dress uniform, her dark auburn hair pulled into a firm braid that peeked beneath her cap. Her posture was proud, firm, but her eyes carried the gentleness of someone who had fought the sea and survived, not just with her life, but with her heart. Beside her stood Rex, his tan and black coat now glossy with care, his stance strong despite the light limp in his back leg. A soft leather brace supported the injured limb, but he stood like a statue, ears forward, tail still. He wore a polished badge on his collar that read, K9, Retired, Hero Status. His presence quieted the crowd more than any speech could, and behind them, resting one hand on the rail of his beloved boat, was Walt Madsen. He was dressed in simple khaki pants and a white linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the faded tattoo that had once saved his identity. The cane he leaned on was carved from driftwood, and the lines of his face, deepened by age and sea air, softened now with something like peace. As the mayor of Charleston, Clara Whitmore, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a commanding voice, took the podium, the dock hushed. "Today," she began, "we gather not just to honor bravery, but to acknowledge something rarer, healing. In a time when the world feels so fractured, this story reminded us that we are still capable of pulling one another from the depths." She turned toward the boat and raised a hand. "To Petty Officer Dana Brooks, for risking her own safety to save a stranger. To Rex, her K-9 partner, who shielded others with his own body. And to Walt Madsen, whose spirit reminds us all that it's never too late to come home." The applause swelled, but it wasn't loud. It was warm, human, respectful. Dana stepped forward and saluted. Walt nodded humbly. Rex merely blinked, then turned his gaze to the horizon, as if already watching for the next wave. After the ceremony, people mingled. Children approached Rex, petting him gently. Veterans shook hands with Walt, some recognizing his name from long-ago shipyards. Dana walked quietly to the bow of Mary's Song, where she had tied something just that morning. It was a pocket watch silver, scratched by time, and engraved with the initials J.B. It had belonged to her father, and it had once hung from his uniform. She had kept it hidden for years, tucked away in a drawer, too painful to look at. But today, it sat fastened to the base of the mast, just beneath the bow rail, where the sunlight caught its face and made it gleam like new. Walt approached slowly, watching her. "That his?" Dana nodded. "He never got a marker. Figured this could be one." Walt touched the mast. "Fitting place. This boat saved us all in a way." From the deck, Rex climbed slowly, his paws clicking against the wood, until he reached Dana's side. He sat, staring out toward the harbor mouth, where the water opened to the vast Atlantic. A warm gust ruffled his fur, and Dana gently placed a hand on his head. Clara Whitmore stepped forward again and handed Dana a small leather case. Inside was a bronze medallion engraved with the Coast Guard crest and a quote, "For service beyond duty. When the sea gave no mercy, you gave more." Dana accepted it quietly, her hand brushing over the smooth metal. "He deserves it more than I do," she said, glancing down at Rex. "He gets steak tonight," Walt added with a dry smile. "And I'll raise a glass of root beer for him." As the crowd slowly dispersed, the three of them remained on the boat, no longer just rescuer, rescued, and companion, but something more entwined, something like a family formed not by blood, but by salt, wind, and survival. The final moment came as the sun reached its apex. Dana, Walt, and Rex stood together at the bow of Mary's Song, looking out toward the endless blue. The watch ticked gently behind them, the only sound beside the lapping waves. And though none of them spoke, it was clear in their posture, their stillness, that they had found something none of them had expected to reclaim, not just hope, but belonging. We don't get to choose where our story begins, but we do get to choose who walks beside us as it continues. For Dana, Walt, and Rex, it wasn't the sea that brought them together. It was grace. A retired boat builder drifting alone, a Coast Guard officer trying to make peace with her past, and a loyal K-9 who never stopped protecting. Their meeting wasn't coincidence. It was a reminder that sometimes what feels lost is just waiting to be found again, with new purpose. Rex didn't just find a new home. He stirred forgotten memories, stitched strangers into family, and became the guardian of something deeper than survival hope. In our own lives, we each drift sometimes through grief, through storms, through long nights of wondering if we still matter. But maybe, like Rex, we're meant to find someone, or be found. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to believe again. Comment below if you've ever met a soul human or animal that changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe to join us for more stories that prove love can still surprise us. May God bless you and everyone still searching. Type Amen if you believe in second chances.
They said no one could survive that storm. No one expected a lifeless island to cradle a miracle. But 47 days later, a rescue team found him. Half-starved, sunburned, smiling. And beside him, a golden retriever with eyes like the sun, guarding something more than just a man's body. What happened on that island, how they survived, what they faced, what she saved him from. You won't believe what one loyal dog can do when all hope is gone. The sea was once a friend to Aiden Harper. He had grown up gazing at the Pacific from the cliffs of Mendocino, dreaming of distant lands and salt-kissed adventures. But that night, beneath a shattered sky, the sea had teeth. It started as a whisper, a subtle shift in the wind, the scent of rain sharpening the air, and the distant mutter of thunder like an old god clearing his throat. Aiden stood on the deck of the Isla Nova, the research vessel he'd joined 2 months earlier, scanning the dark horizon with narrowed eyes. Beside him sat Sunny, a 2-year-old golden retriever with a thick, honey-colored coat and a face that seemed perpetually caught between concern and curiosity. She was technically the ship captain's daughter's dog, but Aiden had become her unofficial guardian on this voyage. The first wave came without warning, slapping the port side with a violent crash. The deck shuddered. Alarms screamed. Overhead, lightning forked the sky in jagged streaks of white-blue fire. Rain fell like nails. In the chaos, crew members shouted commands and scrambled for life vests. Aiden reached for Sunny's collar, his voice low and firm through the wind. "Stay with me, girl. We're gonna be okay." But the sea didn't care about promises. A second wave, taller than the bridge, bore down like a wall of black glass. It smashed into the Isla Nova with monstrous force. The world flipped. Aiden's body lifted, twisted, hurled. He hit the water, salt burning his eyes, throat, lungs. Around him, the sea screamed and frothed like a wounded beast. He surfaced once, gasping. "Sunny!" Another wave. Darkness. Cold. Silence. The morning came in pieces. Aiden awoke with sand in his mouth and blood on his cheek. His shirt clung to him like seaweed. Gulls wheeled overhead in a gray sky. He rolled over with a groan, blinking at the jagged line where beach met jungle. Then he heard it. A soft, panicked whimper. Sunny. She was a few yards away, half buried in sea foam and driftwood, trembling but alive. Her left leg kicked feebly. Aiden crawled to her, cradled her soaked body. "You're okay. You're okay." He whispered it more to himself than her. But her ears twitched at his voice, and slowly, her tail thumped once, twice. They had made it. The island was uncharted, at least to Aiden. It stretched in both directions, a narrow strip of pale sand bordered by dense, tangled jungle. Trees draped in vines towered like sentinels. The air was thick and humid, with a scent of decay and blooming life. There were no footprints but their own. Instinct kicked in. Aiden had studied wilderness survival in theory books, podcasts, a weekend course with a smug ex-Marine in Big Bear. But this was real. The kind of real where one mistake meant death. He searched the beach, gathering debris, fragments of wood, a plastic water bottle, a half-broken crate with canned peaches, and a tarp. Sunny limped behind him, tail low, head down. They made camp in a crescent of palm trees near the tree line. Aiden built a crude lean-to from the tarp and sticks. The canned peaches were devoured within minutes, half going to Sunny, who nuzzled his hand after licking the last of the syrup. But it was water they needed most. As dusk fell, the sky bruised purple. Thunder grumbled again, not far off. Sunny pressed close to Aiden, her body trembling. Rain began, soft at first, then angry. The tarp flapped violently. Aiden wrapped his arms around Sunny, shielding her. She buried her face in his chest. "I'm scared too," he murmured. The night was long. In the dark, things moved. Cracks of branches, rustles in the undergrowth. Once, a guttural call echoed from the jungle, low, predatory. Sunny lifted her head and growled softly. Aiden kept one hand on her and another around a sharpened stick he'd carved earlier. But they were not attacked. Not yet. When dawn bled into the sky, Aiden rose with stiff limbs and a fire in his stomach. "We need fresh water," he said aloud, to Sunny, to the universe, to himself. "And food. And fire." Sunny wagged her tail weakly in reply. It was still early morning when Aiden pushed past the last brittle palm frond and stepped into the jungle. The sun, a pale coin veiled in mist, cast long fingers of light through the canopy, illuminating motes of dust and unseen insects. Behind him, Sunny limped cautiously, every step measured. Her golden coat, now dull from salt and sand, brushed against his leg as if seeking reassurance. Aiden paused. "We stay close, okay? If I say run, you run. Got it?" Sunny offered a faint wag of her tail and sniffed at the damp earth. Their first mission was water. Real, clean water. The kind that wouldn't rot your gut or spark fever dreams. Aiden had read somewhere that bird songs often led to water. But here, the only sounds were buzzing flies, the occasional rustle, and a distant, slow rhythm, like breath exhaled through trees. The jungle wasn't silent. It was waiting. They followed the natural slope of the land, Aiden breaking vines with a fallen stick, eyes darting for movement. The deeper they went, the thicker it grew. Ferns the size of umbrellas, tangled roots that clawed like bony fingers, and mushrooms glistening like wet paint. Once Sunny froze and growled. Aiden followed her gaze, just in time to see a long shadow slither off a branch. Snake, probably venomous. "Let's not find out," Aiden whispered, nudging her onward. By midday, the air was syrup-thick. Sweat trickled down Aiden's back. Sunny panted heavily, tongue lolling. Just as desperation crept into his bones, they heard it. A trickle. He pushed through a curtain of hanging moss, and there it was. A narrow stream, winding like silver ribbon through the forest floor. Not wide, but flowing clear. "God bless you, Sunny," he muttered. She'd been the one to sniff it out. They drank deeply. Aiden used a torn plastic wrapper as a makeshift scoop, cupping it gently towards Sunny's mouth. For a moment, everything was still. But then the forest stirred. The first growl was low, distant, more vibration than sound. Sunny's ears perked. Her body stiffened, then slowly backed behind Aiden's legs. He turned, eyes sweeping, then saw it. At the tree line, half shrouded in fern and shadow, stood a shape. Massive, shaggy, mottled brown fur and yellow eyes gleaming under the canopy. A boar, but not a normal one. This beast was wild, hardened by isolation. Its tusks curved like ivory scythes, crusted with dried mud. It let out a harsh grunt and pawed the ground. Aiden didn't think. He grabbed a sharp branch, raised it like a spear. "Go, Sunny. Run." She hesitated just for a second, then bolted through the underbrush. The boar charged. The ground shook. Aiden spun sideways at the last second, slashing at the beast's flank with the branch. It let out a shriek and careened past, crashing into a tree. Aiden didn't wait. He ran. Branches tore at his skin. Thorns shredded his sleeves. The jungle became a blur. Somewhere ahead, Sunny barked. A frantic, terrified yelp. He found her cornered in a hollow beneath a toppled tree, growling at the sound of hooves behind him. Aiden leapt down, chest heaving, and pulled a rock from his pocket, the only weapon he had. He raised it just as the boar crashed into view again. But it didn't charge. The beast stood there, bleeding from its side, panting heavily. It stared at them, for a long, trembling second, then turned and lumbered off into the shadows. That night they didn't speak. Not that they ever truly could, but silence has flavors, and tonight's was thick with fear and questions. Back at their lean-to, Aiden cleaned Sunny's leg again, her limp worse after the chase, and applied leaves he'd crushed into pulp using 2 stones. "You were brave today," he said softly, wiping her paw. "Too brave. Let me be the stupid one next time." Sunny nuzzled his hand. He smiled, weary. Days passed in rhythm. They learned the jungle's moods. Which berries were sweet, which leaves left a burning tongue. Aiden built snares, poor ones at first, but by the 5th day they caught a lizard. He roasted it over a fire made with friction and dry palm bark. Sunny didn't love the taste, but she ate. They returned to the stream daily. On one trip, Aiden carved a symbol into a tree, a simple mark, a triangle within a circle, just in case someone found it, or just in case they didn't. The rain came again on the 7th night, harder than before. Thunder cracked open the sky like a split drum. Their tarp shelter snapped loose, flailing like a wounded bird. Wind roared through the trees. Aiden scrambled to hold the frame, yelling through the downpour, "Sunny, get under!" But she didn't. She was trembling in the open, soaked to the bone, eyes wide with primal fear. Aiden dropped the tarp and crawled to her, wrapping his body around hers. She whined, a pitiful sound, small and raw. "I got you," he whispered into her ear. "It's just water, just Sky having a bad dream." She curled tighter into his chest. By dawn, the shelter was half collapsed, their small stash of firewood ruined. Everything smelled of wet earth and desperation. Aiden didn't speak. He simply stood, soaked and shivering, staring at the horizon. Then he did the only thing he could do. He began again. The island never truly slept. Even when stars scattered themselves across the velvet sky and the jungle seemed still, 1,000 small sounds hummed in the dark. Frogs croaked in strange cadences, insects clicked like clockwork, and somewhere in the deeper woods, predators made their quiet rounds. Aiden Harper had begun to understand this rhythm. Not control it, never that, but respect it. He now rose with the sun and moved like a ghost through trees, avoiding paths he once blundered down. His beard had grown coarse. His frame, once soft from city life, now hardened, lean. There was a steadiness in his eyes, but also something deeper, a quiet desperation that hadn't yet bloomed into despair. Sunny was healing. Her limp was still there, but faint. She walked beside him now without fear, ears always tilted toward the treetops, tail held low but alert. She had become his compass, his warning bell, his only family, and they were hungry. They had finished their last bit of fruit the night before. The lizard meat hadn't returned. Aiden's traps remained empty. He cursed himself silently for relying on luck. The stream gave them water, but the island didn't feed the lazy. So, on that morning, the 22nd since the wreck, by his estimate, he decided to go deeper. Farther than ever. "I'll find us something, girl," he whispered, fastening a strap of braided palm fronds over his shoulder, carrying the sharpened what he now called a spear. "You hold the camp." But Sunny wouldn't stay behind. When he turned, she followed, trotting carefully. He sighed. "All right, but we do this smart." The canopy thickened as they hiked north, sunlight filtering in only in ragged threads. Aiden marked their trail with chalky white stones, careful not to lose their way. They passed strange flowers, birds with feathers like burning coals, and claw marks on tree trunks that made Aiden tighten his grip on the spear. It was late morning when they came upon a break in the forest, an open clearing filled with soft, mossy ground and a pool of water no larger than a backyard pond. Deer tracks crisscrossed the mud. Perfect hunting ground. Aiden crouched low, motioned Sunny to stay. She obeyed reluctantly, and he waited. Hours passed. The jungle sweltered. Aiden's stomach cramped from emptiness, but he didn't move. He remembered what his instructor once said. The forest isn't about noise. It's about timing. Let the hunger make you sharper, not dumber. Then a flicker of movement. A small animal, maybe a hare, crept to the water's edge. Aiden didn't breathe. His fingers tightened on the spear. He lunged. The creature bolted. He missed. The spear stuck into mud, and Aiden fell forward with a grunt. "Damn it!" Sunny barked. Then she howled. Not a long, mournful howl, but a sharp, panicked cry. Aiden turned, heart hammering, and saw it. From the opposite edge of the clearing emerged a wildcat. Large, lean, and silent as moonlight. Its eyes locked on Sunny. "Hey!" Aiden screamed, scrambling to his feet. The cat snarled, ears back, stalking low. Sunny stood frozen, hackles raised, trembling. Aiden grabbed a nearby branch and charged, shouting like a madman. The cat hesitated, then bolted into the underbrush, vanishing like smoke. They stood there for several minutes, Aiden panting, Sunny silent. Then she walked to him, pressed her head into his knee. "I'm sorry," he whispered, kneeling. "You saved me again." He didn't catch anything that day, but he found something more important. A trail of dug holes and claw marks, fresh and clustered, leading toward a line of bushes where the wildcat had emerged. Behind those bushes was something astonishing. Fruit, dozens of it. Bright orange, soft-skinned, wild island mangoes. He tore one open. The smell was intoxicating. He and Sunny ate until their bellies swelled, juice dripping from Aiden's chin and from Sunny's golden whiskers. That night, they returned to camp slowly, tired but full. Aiden made a small fire with what little dry wood remained. They sat close, warmth dancing across their faces. Above them, the moon hung low, swollen and soft. Sunny curled against his leg. "You know," he murmured, scratching behind her ear, "maybe we were meant to end up here, you and me. Maybe this island isn't punishment. Maybe it's pause, a chance to reset." Sunny gave a small huff, then silence, then a distant sound, just past the ridge. Not the wildcat, not the boar. This was different. It was metallic. A clink. Then another. Aiden stood slowly. Something or someone was nearby. It began as a whisper of metal against stone. So soft Aiden thought it might have been his imagination. But Sunny heard it too. Her ears perked sharply as she sat up from the spot she'd been dozing, nose twitching, body tense. The jungle was never silent. Yet in that moment, as the fire cracked softly behind them and the stars blinked down from their midnight thrones, the trees held their breath. The sound came again. Aiden rose, heart thrumming. He picked up the spear he'd fashioned days earlier and tightened his grip on it. The handle was wrapped in strips of cloth torn from his own shirt, the tip still stained from a previous encounter with a stubborn root. Sunny moved to his side without a command. Her paw, still healing, barely slowed her now. "Let's go see," Aiden whispered. They left the fire behind and slipped into the trees. The sound led them toward the western edge of the island, an area they'd never explored. Aiden marked the path as they went, breaking small branches and dragging his foot along the earth to leave a trail. It took nearly half an hour of cautious, silent trekking before they reached it. A small clearing opened beneath the moonlight, ringed with banana palms and a lone charred stump in the center. Scattered nearby were rusted tins, bent cutlery, and the remnants of a tarp, half buried in moss. But what truly caught Aiden's breath was the metallic object lying in the grass. A flare gun. He dropped to his knees. "Holy, Sunny, this is a flare gun," he breathed, examining it under the moonlight. "And it's not old, not ancient. Someone's been here. Not long ago." The gun was battered but intact. He opened the chamber. One flare. Just one. "It's hope," he murmured. But as he lifted it, something snagged his gaze, on the tree behind the stump. Carved into the bark, weathered but legible. "Stay west. They patrol the east." He stared at it, confusion folding into his brow. "They?" Sunny let out a low growl, just once, barely audible. The jungle rustled, and then nothing. They returned to their lean-to cautiously, every shadow now seeming to hold breath and secrets. Aiden placed the flare gun inside a sealed container fashioned from bamboo and driftwood, wrapped it tightly in leaves, and buried it under the hearth. "Not yet," he said aloud. "We save that for when it really counts." The next morning, Aiden took stock. Their shelter had survived the last storm, but barely. The roof sagged with water weight, and the floor was damp. Ants had found their way into the food stash. It was clear they needed something better. Aiden spent the next 3 days building a new camp, higher ground, closer to the banana grove and further from the predator-rich jungle depths. He dug trenches to divert water, wove a tighter roof of palm leaves and bark, and stacked firewood with Sunny's occasional help, though more often she supervised from the shade. By the 4th day they had a fire pit, a raised sleeping platform, and even a crude windbreak wall. It wasn't a home, but it was a fortress. On the 5th day the storm came, not a passing cloudburst or summer squall. This was a cyclone, spawned from the sea like a curse. The sky turned copper. Wind howled like wolves. Waves thundered against the cliffs. Trees leaned and groaned under the weight of the sky's fury. Aiden secured the camp as best he could. He tied the shelter to trees with braided vines. He stuffed gaps with ferns and wet clay. But no amount of planning could keep them safe from what was coming. "Inside," he told Sunny. They huddled beneath the platform as rain came sideways. Thunder exploded above them. The world became roar and chaos. Sunny whimpered, trembling uncontrollably. "It's okay," he murmured, holding her tightly. "We'll ride this out, like we always do." But for the first time he wasn't sure they would. A branch tore through the wall. Wind pulled half the roof away. The fire was gone. Everything was drenched, shivering, gasping. Sonny barked once, then howled. A long, low, bone-deep howl that cut through the storm like a cry to heaven. And the storm slowed. Not literally, but in that sound, so full of fear and defiance. Aiden felt something rise in him. Something hot, alive, the fire within. He grabbed what he could, blankets, dry twigs, the wrapped container with the flare, and pulled Sonny out, racing through the downpour, looking for a cave, a rock, any shelter. That's when they saw it. The ridge, a low slope that curved into the side of the island, nearly hidden behind banana trees. A dark opening near its base. They scrambled inside just as the full force of the wind shrieked past behind them. The cave was narrow, musty, filled with old roots and the bones of animals long dead. But it was dry. Aiden collapsed. Sonny curled beside him. Neither spoke. They had survived. Again. Later that night, as the storm died and the cave echoed only with dripping water, Aiden stared at the flare gun. One shot. One moment. He turned to Sonny. "When the sky is clear, and the world is still, we fire it." She blinked as if understanding. And outside, in the hush of the post-storm jungle, a single bird began to sing. The storm had carved a new face into the island. Trees lay split like broken bones, their limbs splayed across the forest floor. Debris, coconut husks, snapped vines, bird nests, and once even a child's sandal likely from a wreck long before, littered the shoreline. The jungle, once a cacophony of life, now murmured in hushed tones. Even the birds were quiet, as if mourning. Aiden stood at the edge of the ridge, above the remains of their battered second camp. His clothes were damp, torn at the shoulder. His hands blistered, his eyes tired. But he was alive, and so was Sonny. The golden retriever lay stretched on a flat rock just behind him, soaking in the new sun. Her coat had begun to regain its shine, kissed now with golden streaks from the salt and sun. Aiden looked back at her. "We're not dead yet," he said, his voice rough with wear. "And I'll take that as a win." Sonny sneezed softly and gave a lazy tail wag. That afternoon, Aiden climbed the tallest bluff he could find, the same one he'd marked during their second week but hadn't dared explore. Now, with the flare gun tucked safely into a leather pouch he'd crafted from scavenged material, he was ready. The climb was brutal. The rocks were slick. Twice he slipped and tore skin from his palm. But when he reached the top, the view took his breath. The ocean stretched endlessly, glittering beneath the early summer sun. Clouds rolled lazily across the sky. And then he saw it. A dot, just barely visible beyond the curve of the horizon. It wasn't a bird. It moved too slowly. It wasn't a rock. It shifted direction. A boat. A cargo ship, probably small. But real. Real and moving. Real and leaving. He scrambled to the pouch. Fingers shaking, he opened the chamber. One flare. Only one. The wind picked up, whispering doubts. If the flare misfired, if the boat didn't see, he'd lose his only chance. But if he waited, the ship would disappear entirely. He looked back down the ridge. Sonny had followed, panting, cautious but determined. She now sat beside him, eyes fixed on the sea. Aiden knelt. "This is it, girl." He raised the gun. A deep breath, and pulled the trigger. The flare screamed into the sky like a dying star, slicing the blue with a trail of crimson fire. It arced high above the island, painting everything in urgent red before vanishing in a burst of smoke. Aiden stood frozen. Nothing. No sign. No flicker from the ship.
No horn.
Minutes passed, each longer than the last. Sonny whined, pressing into his leg. Then, on the horizon, a tiny glint, a reflection. The ship was turning. They sprinted. Down the ridge, through the ravaged forest, past the sundered palms and into the clearing. Aiden grabbed the small sheet of metal he had polished as a mirror and began flashing it toward the ocean, using the sunlight. 3 long flashes. 3 short. Morse for SOS. He didn't know if anyone would see. But he tried anyway. Sonny barked. Loud. Again and again. And on the horizon, the ship stopped. By evening, a smaller vessel, a motorized dinghy, was on its way to shore. Aiden stood waist-deep in the surf, arms waving. Behind him, Sonny barked as though announcing the second coming. The dinghy slowed. 2 men in reflective vests and windbreakers stared at them, stunned. "Holy, he's got a dog too," one of them shouted. "We thought that flare was a prank." Aiden laughed. A sound he hadn't made in weeks. He held up the flare gun. Not a prank, just a miracle on delay. The ride back to the main vessel was silent, peaceful. Aiden held Sonny close as she rested her head in his lap, her body finally still. The wind tousled his hair. Salt stung the cuts on his hands. But he didn't care. When they climbed aboard, a young girl, perhaps 10, ran to the railing. She wore a yellow jacket and carried a stuffed fox. "Daddy!" she called to the man beside Aiden. Then, pointing, "Can I pet the dog?" Aiden smiled. "She'd like that." Sonny allowed the child's hug. For the first time, she wagged her tail like she used to. Later that night, in the galley, Aiden sat with a cup of hot tea and a fresh bandage on his arm. Sonny slept at his feet. The captain, a gruff woman with kind eyes, leaned across the table. "Shipwrecked for over a month, and you still had the brains to fire one flare at the right time. Luck or instinct?" Aiden looked down at Sonny, then back up. "Neither. Faith." The ship's horn bellowed through the morning haze as the harbor of Port Florence came into view. The coastline, after weeks of nothing but trees and crashing waves, looked like something from another lifetime. Buildings with real corners, streets with movement, people standing still. Aiden stood at the deck's edge, one hand resting on Sonny's head. She leaned into him, her golden fur fluttering in the wind, eyes squinting against the light. Neither spoke, but both felt it, the strange weight of returning. Aiden wasn't the same man who had boarded the Isla Nova weeks ago, and Sonny was no longer just someone's pet. They had crossed through storm and silence, hunger and fear. Together, at the dock, the crew helped them down. A few local officials approached with clipboards and gentle questions. Aiden answered them all, voice steady, his eyes only darting occasionally to check on Sonny. A woman in a red coat, a reporter, asked, "What kept you going all that time out there?" Aiden paused, glanced at the golden retriever by his side, who was now sniffing the corner of a gear crate like it contained treasure. "She did," he said simply. "She kept the fire in me lit." The woman smiled, jotted it down. "And the flare. One shot. And a prayer." Over the following days, Aiden and Sonny became local news darlings. Interviews, photographs. Someone uploaded a video of their return, and soon, it spread. Man and dog survived the wild, with hashtags like #SurvivorsTogether and #GoldenMiracle. But none of that mattered much to Aiden. What mattered was quiet. He used a small stipend the shipping company offered him as compensation to rent a modest cabin on the northern hills outside town. Nothing fancy, just a wooden porch, some space to breathe, and a fireplace. He split his time between writing, journaling everything about the island before memory could blur it, and walking Sonny through the fog-lined trails behind the cabin. Sometimes, he caught her pausing at ridgelines, staring off into the sea. He did the same. 2 weeks later, a letter came from a woman named Claire Donnell, the former ship captain's daughter. "I heard what happened. I'm glad you found her. I thought I lost both of you." There was a photograph attached. Sonny as a puppy, all paws and oversized ears. Aiden smiled, then looked down at her now sprawled across the rug. "I think she found herself," he whispered. "And I found something too." In the months that followed, Aiden began volunteering at a local animal rescue, Golden Light Haven, a place that rehabilitated animals rescued from disasters. Sonny, now unofficial mascot, helped children with trauma. She'd walk gently beside them, lie with them when they cried, nudge their hands when they doubted. One boy, 8 years old, mute since losing his family in a landslide, sat with her one morning and whispered, "Thank you," his first word in over a year. Aiden saw it, and something in his chest gave way. He turned that night to Sunny by the fire. "Maybe the island wasn't where we were lost. Maybe it's where we were found." She yawned, then rested her head on his foot. One evening, as sunset bathed the porch in gold, Aiden opened the old crate he had kept sealed for months. Inside, the flare gun, empty now, rusting. He placed it on a shelf above the hearth. Not as a weapon, as a symbol. Next to it he placed a photograph. He and Sunny, on the deck of the rescue ship, wind in their hair, light in their eyes. And so the island faded, not into forgetfulness, but into memory. A place that taught him courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it barked. Sometimes it limped on 3 legs through the jungle. Sometimes it curled beside you in the rain and refused to leave. Sometimes salvation doesn't roar. It doesn't come with bright lights or grand gestures. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs, curls up next to you in the dark, and simply stays. On that island, it wasn't just about surviving nature. It was about surviving the silence, the fear, the loneliness. And she, without words, without conditions, carried him through it all. In life, we all face our own deserted islands. Times when we feel lost, unseen, unheard. But if we open our hearts, sometimes God sends us a companion. Not to lead us out, but to remind us we're not alone. If the story touched your soul, share it. Leave a comment. And if you believe in miracles that walk on pause, type Amen below. Let's remind the world, loyalty saves.